AD 64. Rome burns, and Emperor Nero fiddles. But is this the real story? Join us as we unravel the mystery of Nero and the Great Fire of Rome. This isn't just ancient history. It's a tale of power, propaganda, and perception that resonates even today. Are you ready to see beyond the flames and uncover truths hidden for 2 millennia? Let's dive into one of history's most controversial events and discover lessons that could change how you view leadership and public opinion in our modern world. Nero's rise to power and early reign. Imagine being thrust into the most powerful position in the known world at just 16 years old. This was the reality for Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus in AD 37. Nero's path to the throne was paved by his ambitious mother, Agrippina the Younger. After marrying her uncle, Emperor Claudius, she manipulated events to have Nero adopted as heir, sidelining Claudius's own son. In AD 54, Claudius died, some say poisoned by Agrippina, and young Nero ascended to become emperor of Rome. The early years of Nero's reign were promising. Under the guidance of his tutors, the philosopher Seneca and the praetorian prefect Burrus, Nero showed signs of being a capable ruler. He reduced taxes, gave more independence to the Senate, and banned capital punishment. The Roman people adored him, seeing him as a breath of fresh air after the stern rule of Claudius. But power, as they say, corrupts. As Nero grew older, he began to chafe under the influence of his advisors and his domineering mother. He sought more control, more adulation, and more indulgence in his passions. Nero fancied himself an artist, a poet, musician, and charioteer. He would often perform for audiences, requiring their rapturous applause. This shift from statesman to performer didn't sit well with the Roman elite. They saw it as undignified for an emperor to appear on stage like a common entertainer. But Nero was undeterred. He was reshaping the very concept of what it meant to be emperor. As tensions grew with his mother, Nero took drastic action. In AD 59, he had Agrippina assassinated, marking a turning point in his reign. Without her influence and gradually pushing aside his other advisors, Nero was free to rule as he saw fit. Little did Rome know that this was just the beginning. The stage was set for an event that would forever change the city and cement Nero's place in history, but not in the way he might have hoped. This period of Nero's life teaches us a valuable lesson about the corrupting influence of power and the importance of maintaining a strong moral compass, even when, especially when, you're at the top. It also shows how public perception can shift rapidly, reminding us to be cautious about putting too much faith in charismatic leaders. The Great Fire of Rome in AD 64. Picture a warm summer night in Rome, July 18th, AD 64. The Eternal City sleeps, unaware that it's about to face one of the most catastrophic events in its long history. It began near the Circus Maximus, Rome's grand chariot racing stadium. A small fire, perhaps started in one of the many shops lining the stadium, quickly grew out of control. In a city of nearly 1 million people, packed with wooden structures and narrow streets, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The fire spread rapidly, fueled by strong winds and the densely packed insulae, the apartment buildings where most Romans lived. These multi-story structures, often shoddily built, became death traps as the flames engulfed them. Imagine the panic, the chaos, as people fled their homes, carrying what little they could save. For 6 days and 7 nights, the fire raged uncontrolled. It devoured entire neighborhoods, leapt across streets, and climbed the city's famous 7 hills. The heat was so intense that even stone buildings crumbled. The smoke, visible for miles, turned day into night. Where was Nero during this calamity? Contrary to popular belief, he wasn't in Rome when the fire started. He was in Antium, his coastal villa. Upon hearing the news, he rushed back to the city to oversee relief efforts. But here's where the story takes a controversial turn. Some accounts, like that of the historian Tacitus, suggest that Nero's response was initially sluggish. Others paint a picture of an emperor deeply engaged in fighting the fire and helping his people. What we do know is that Nero opened public buildings and his own gardens to shelter the displaced. He personally helped in distributing food and necessities. Yet, despite these efforts, rumors began to circulate. Whispers that would grow into a roar that echoes through history to this day. As the fire finally died down, the scale of destruction became clear. Of Rome's 14 districts, only 4 remained untouched. 3 were completely destroyed, and 7 were severely damaged. Tens of thousands were homeless, and countless lives were lost. The Great Fire of Rome wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a turning point in Roman history and in Nero's reign. It set the stage for dramatic changes in urban planning, architecture, and even religion. But more immediately, it sparked a controversy that would define Nero's legacy. This catastrophe serves as a stark reminder of how quickly our world can change, and how leaders are judged not just by their actions, but by public perception of those actions. It's a lesson in crisis management that remains relevant today. How do we respond when disaster strikes? How do we balance immediate needs with long-term recovery? Causes and spread of the fire. To truly understand the devastation of the Great Fire, we need to paint a picture of ancient Rome in AD 64. Imagine a bustling metropolis, home to nearly 1 million souls, crammed into an area much smaller than modern cities of comparable population. The streets were narrow, winding, and often congested. Buildings were packed tightly together, many reaching several stories high. Now, let's consider the materials used in construction. While the wealthy lived in stone houses, the vast majority of Romans resided in wooden structures, or insulae, multi-story apartment buildings often hastily constructed with poor materials. These buildings were literal tinderboxes, waiting for a spark. The fire's origin near the Circus Maximus was no coincidence. This area was filled with shops selling flammable goods, oils, fabrics, and other combustibles. A single unattended lamp or a cooking fire could easily ignite a blaze that would quickly spiral out of control. But what turned this fire from a local incident into a city-wide catastrophe? Several factors conspired to create the perfect storm. 1. Weather conditions. July in Rome is hot and dry. The wooden structures of the city were like kindling, primed to burn. 2. Wind. Strong winds fanned the flames, carrying embers across streets and even up the city's hills. 3. Lack of firefighting infrastructure. While Rome did have fire brigades, they were ill-equipped to handle a blaze of this magnitude. Water was scarce and had to be brought in buckets from the Tiber River or public fountains. Urban layout. The narrow, winding streets that gave Rome its charm also hindered efforts to contain the fire. They acted as channels, directing the flames and making it difficult for people to escape or for firefighters to access affected areas. Combustible materials. Beyond the wooden structures, many buildings contained highly flammable materials, from stored grain to oil used for lamps. As the fire spread, it created its own weather system. The intense heat generated powerful updrafts, creating a firestorm that consumed everything in its path. Witnesses described scenes of horror, people trapped in collapsing buildings, others jumping into the Tiber to escape the flames, and some simply giving up hope in the face of the inferno. The fire didn't just destroy buildings, it erased centuries of Roman history. Temples, public buildings, and priceless artworks were reduced to ash. The Forum, the heart of Roman civic life, was badly damaged. Even the emperor's palace on the Palatine Hill didn't escape unscathed. The Great Fire of Rome wasn't just a historical event. It was a turning point that forced a complete rethinking of urban planning and fire safety. Its lessons echo through the centuries, influencing how we build and protect our cities even today. Nero's actions during and immediately after the fire. As the flames engulfed Rome, all eyes turned to Emperor Nero. His response to this crisis would define his reign and shape his legacy for millennia to come. Contrary to the popular image of Nero fiddling while Rome burned, historical accounts paint a more complex picture. When news of the fire reached Nero at his villa in Antium, he immediately rushed back to the city. But what did he do upon arrival? According to some accounts, including that of the historian Tacitus, Nero took charge of the firefighting efforts. He was seen moving through the streets, often without his bodyguards, coordinating the response. Picture the young emperor, his face streaked with soot, shouting orders and encouraging the firefighters. Nero opened up public buildings and even his own gardens to shelter those displaced by the fire. He organized the distribution of food and other necessities to the survivors. In a gesture that was both practical and symbolic, he personally helped search the ruins for survivors and bodies. But Nero's actions weren't just reactive. As the fire raged, he was already thinking about the future. He quickly drafted plans for rebuilding the city, envisioning a grander, more organized Rome rising from the ashes. This forward-thinking approach would later prove both a blessing and a curse for his reputation. Immediately after the fire, Nero implemented several measures. First, he set up temporary shelters and food distribution centers throughout the city. He reduced the price of grain to prevent food shortages and speculation. He organized teams to clear debris and recover bodies. And finally, he launched an investigation into the cause of the fire. These actions paint a picture of a leader actively engaged in crisis management. So why did Nero's reputation suffer so badly in the aftermath? Part of the answer lies in Nero's grand plans for rebuilding. While many Romans were still reeling from their losses, Nero was already planning his new palace, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. This massive complex would cover a huge swath of the burned area, leading to accusations that Nero had engineered the fire for his own benefit. Moreover, Nero's artistic temperament came to the fore in a way that many Romans found distasteful. There are accounts of him viewing the burning city from a tower, dressed in his stage costume, singing of the destruction of Troy. While he may have seen this as a poetic response to tragedy, many viewed it as callous and self-indulgent. Nero's actions during the fire and its aftermath offer a fascinating case study in leadership during a crisis. They remind us of the importance of not just taking action, but also managing perceptions. A leader's response to disaster can make or break their legacy. Consider how this applies to our world today. How do we judge our leaders' responses to crises? Do we focus more on their immediate actions or their long-term plans? Nero's experience shows us that both matter and that the court of public opinion can be harsh and lasting. Accusations and rumors surrounding Nero's involvement. In the smoldering aftermath of the Great Fire, whispers began to circulate through the streets of Rome. These weren't just murmurs of discontent, but something far more sinister. Accusations that Emperor Nero himself had orchestrated the disaster. But why would an emperor burn his own city? The rumors that spread through Rome offered a tapestry of motives, each more outrageous than the last. Some claimed that Nero, fancying himself a great artist, had sought to witness a grand conflagration to inspire his poetry. The image of the emperor standing atop a hill, lyre in hand, composing verses as Rome burned around him, became seared into the public imagination. Others whispered of more practical, if no less nefarious reasons. They suggested that Nero had wanted to clear space for his ambitious building projects, particularly his grandiose Domus Aurea. The fire, they said, was merely a convenient way to wipe the slate clean for his architectural ambitions. Still others, painting Nero as a megalomaniac of the highest order, claimed that the emperor sought to destroy the old Rome entirely, intending to rebuild it in his own image. In this version of events, Nero dreamed of a city rising from the ashes, transformed and renamed Neropolis in his honor. These accusations gained traction quickly. Picture the scene: traumatized citizens, having lost everything, looking for someone to blame. The emperor, with his eccentric behavior and grand plans for rebuilding, became an easy target. The historian Tacitus, writing some 50 years after the event, reports these rumors but doesn't fully endorse them. He presents a more nuanced view, suggesting that while Nero might not have started the fire, he may have taken advantage of it. Suetonius, another Roman historian, is less charitable. He directly accuses Nero of arson, claiming that the emperor sent out men pretending to be drunk to set fire to the city. He even suggests that Nero watched the conflagration from the Tower of Maecenas, exulting in what he called the beauty of the flames. But let's step back and consider, how credible are these accusations? Firstly, Nero was in Antium when the fire started, not in Rome. He rushed back to the city to oversee relief efforts, which seems an odd action for someone who had planned the disaster. Secondly, the fire destroyed much of Nero's own property, including parts of his palace. Would he have sacrificed his own possessions for this scheme? Lastly, the area where the fire started, near the Circus Maximus, was not an area Nero had earmarked for his new projects. Yet, the rumors persisted and grew. They showcase the power of public opinion and how quickly it can turn against a leader, especially one as controversial as Nero. This episode in history teaches us valuable lessons about the nature of rumor and accusation. In times of crisis, people often look for a scapegoat, and those in power are easy targets. It reminds us to approach sensational claims with skepticism, to look for evidence, and to consider alternative explanations. Moreover, it highlights the importance of communication in leadership. Nero's failure to effectively counter these rumors contributed to his downfall. In our modern world of instant communication and social media, how might a leader in Nero's position respond differently? The accusations against Nero, whether true or false, shaped his legacy for millennia. They serve as a stark reminder of how powerful narratives can be, and how they can overshadow even the most dramatic events in history. Persecution of Christians as scapegoats. As the ashes settled and the smoke cleared, Rome was a city in turmoil. The people demanded answers, and more importantly, they demanded justice. Nero, feeling the pressure of public opinion turning against him, needed a scapegoat. His choice would have far-reaching consequences that would echo through the centuries. Enter the Christians, a relatively new and misunderstood religious sect in Rome. They were already viewed with suspicion by many Romans, their monotheistic beliefs and secretive gatherings sparking wild rumors and mistrust. Nero seized upon this existing prejudice, pointing the finger of blame squarely at the Christian community. The historian Tacitus describes the events that followed with chilling detail. Christians were rounded up en masse, subjected to mockery, and then to unimaginable cruelties. Some were dressed in animal skins and torn apart by dogs in the arena. Others were crucified. Perhaps most horrifically, some were covered in pitch and set ablaze to serve as human torches, illuminating Nero's gardens during nighttime spectacles. Imagine the scene. Crowds gathered to witness these gruesome displays, their faces flickering in the light of burning bodies. Nero himself would mingle with the spectators or drive his chariot through the grounds, reveling in the macabre entertainment. It was a calculated move. By providing such spectacles, he aimed to redirect the people's anger and suspicion away from himself and towards this vulnerable minority. But why did Nero's accusation against the Christians gain such traction? Part of it lay in the apocalyptic nature of Christian teachings. Some Romans interpreted talk of the coming kingdom of God as a threat to burn down the existing order, quite literally in this case. The Christians' refusal to participate in Roman religious practices, including emperor worship, also marked them as potential traitors and troublemakers. This persecution had profound effects. For the Christian community, it became a defining moment of martyrdom, strengthening their resolve and contributing to the growth of their faith. The apostles Peter and Paul are said to have been among those martyred during this period, their deaths becoming central to Christian tradition. For Roman society, it set a dangerous precedent. The targeting of a religious minority as a scapegoat for political purposes would be a tactic employed by future emperors and leaders throughout history. The persecution of Christians after the Great Fire of Rome stands as a dark chapter in history, but one that offers valuable lessons about power, prejudice, and the importance of protecting vulnerable communities in times of crisis. Rebuilding efforts and the Domus Aurea. As the flames died down and the smoke cleared, Rome lay in ruins. But from this devastation, Nero saw an opportunity, a chance to remake the eternal city in his own grand vision. The emperor wasted no time in launching an ambitious rebuilding program that would transform the urban landscape of Rome. Nero's plans were nothing short of revolutionary. He envisioned a city with wider streets, lower buildings, and more open spaces, all designed to prevent future fires from spreading so rapidly. Porticos were to be built in front of apartment blocks and houses, providing fire breaks and shelter from the sun. The use of more fire-resistant materials like stone was mandated for new construction. But the centerpiece of Nero's rebuilding efforts was undoubtedly the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. This sprawling palace complex was to be Nero's masterpiece, a testament to his power and artistic vision. Imagine a vast estate in the heart of Rome, covering hundreds of acres, complete with artificial lakes, lush gardens, colonnaded walks, and a colossal statue of Nero himself. The Domus Aurea was a marvel of engineering and opulence. Its main banquet hall featured a domed ceiling that rotated, mimicking the movements of the heavens. Flowers and perfumes would shower down on guests from hidden pipes. The walls were adorned with precious gems and mother of pearl. One contemporary claimed that the palace made Rome into one great house, and Romans joked that if Nero's house expanded any further, they'd all have to move to nearby Veii. Yet, for all its grandeur, the Domus Aurea was deeply controversial. Many Romans saw it as an excessive display of wealth and self-indulgence, especially in the wake of such widespread destruction. The vast tracts of land it occupied in the heart of the city were seen as an affront to those who had lost their homes in the fire. Nero's rebuilding efforts extended beyond the Domus Aurea, of course. He initiated the construction of new temples, repaired damaged infrastructure, and implemented new building codes. But these more practical measures were overshadowed by the extravagance of his palace. The speed and scale of the rebuilding strained Rome's resources and workforce. Nero imposed heavy taxes and even plundered temples for gold to fund his projects. He brought in workers from all over the empire, creating a massive influx of laborers into the city. This period of reconstruction offers us valuable insights into urban planning, crisis response, and the balance between public good and personal ambition. Nero's reforms, wider streets, fire-resistant materials, improved building codes, were genuinely progressive. Yet his self-aggrandizing projects undermined public support for these measures. The Domus Aurea, like much of Nero's legacy, would prove short-lived. After his death, subsequent emperors would repurpose or destroy much of the complex. Yet its influence on Roman architecture and urban planning would be felt for centuries to come. Urban planning changes in the aftermath. The Great Fire of Rome wasn't just a disaster. It was a catalyst for change. As the city rose from the ashes, it did so with a new vision, one that would influence urban planning for centuries to come. Nero, for all his faults, recognized the opportunity to reshape Rome into a more modern, efficient, and fire-resistant city. The narrow, winding streets that had allowed the fire to spread so rapidly were replaced with wider, straighter thoroughfares. This not only helped with fire prevention, but also improved traffic flow and made the city easier to navigate. Picture the transformation. Where once stood haphazard wooden structures, now rose orderly stone buildings. The new Rome was a city of brick and marble, far less susceptible to fire. Nero mandated the use of fire-resistant materials in construction, particularly for the lower levels of buildings. This wasn't just about safety. It was about creating a grander, more impressive Rome. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of insulae, multi-story apartment buildings made of brick. These replaced many of the wooden tenements that had housed Rome's poorer citizens. While not without their problems, the insulae represented a more organized approach to urban housing. Nero also introduced the concept of porticos, covered walkways that ran along the fronts of buildings. These served multiple purposes. They provided fire breaks between structures, offered shelter from the sun and rain, and created a more uniform, aesthetically pleasing streetscape. The rebuilding efforts weren't limited to architecture. Nero implemented new regulations for waste disposal and building maintenance. He established a more organized fire brigade, equipped with better tools and given more authority to demolish buildings to create fire breaks if necessary. Perhaps most importantly, Nero's planners introduced the concept of urban zoning. Different areas of the city were designated for specific purposes: residential, commercial, industrial. This helped to reduce fire risks by separating potentially hazardous activities from densely populated areas. These changes weren't universally popular. Many Romans resented the loss of the old, familiar city. The wider streets and uniform buildings lacked the charm and intimacy of the old neighborhoods. Some saw it as an attempt by Nero to impose his will on the very fabric of Rome. Yet the impact of these changes can't be overstated. They set new standards for urban planning that would influence cities throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. Many of the principles introduced in the aftermath of the Great Fire, wide streets, fire-resistant materials, zoning laws, remain cornerstones of modern urban planning. This period in Rome's history offers us a powerful lesson in resilience and adaptation. It shows how even the most devastating disasters can become opportunities for improvement and innovation. As we face our own urban challenges today, from natural disasters to rapid population growth, the rebuilding of Rome reminds us of the importance of forward-thinking planning and the courage to implement radical changes when necessary. Yet, it also serves as a cautionary tale. Nero's vision, while in many ways progressive, came at a great cost, both financial and in terms of public goodwill. It reminds us that even the most well-intentioned changes must be balanced with the needs and desires of the people they affect. Historical accounts and controversies. The Great Fire of Rome and Nero's involvement in it have been subjects of debate for nearly 2 millennia. As we peel back the layers of history, we find a complex tapestry of accounts, each colored by the biases and agendas of their authors. Our primary sources for this event come from 3 Roman historians, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio. Each presents a slightly different version of events, leaving us to piece together the truth from their sometimes contradictory accounts. Tacitus, writing about 50 years after the fire, provides the most detailed and nuanced account. He reports the rumors of Nero's involvement but doesn't fully endorse them. Instead, he paints a picture of an emperor who took advantage of the disaster rather than instigating it. Tacitus describes Nero's relief efforts alongside his extravagant rebuilding plans, giving us a complex portrait of the emperor's actions. Suetonius, on the other hand, is far less charitable. Writing in the early 2nd century, he directly accuses Nero of arson, claiming the emperor sent out men pretending to be drunk to set fire to the city. Suetonius's account is filled with salacious details, like Nero singing about the fall of Troy while watching Rome burn. While dramatic, many historians today view Suetonius's work with skepticism, noting his tendency for sensationalism. Cassius Dio, writing even later in the 3rd century, also blames Nero for the fire. He goes so far as to claim that Nero had men openly setting fires throughout the city and hindering those trying to extinguish them. These conflicting accounts highlight the challenges of uncovering historical truth. Each writer had their own agenda, their own sources, and their own biases. Tacitus, for instance, while critical of Nero, seems to strive for a degree of objectivity. Suetonius and Dio writing further removed from the events, may have been more influenced by the negative legends that had grown around Nero's reign. Modern historians approach these accounts with caution, cross-referencing them with archaeological evidence and our understanding of Roman society. Many now believe that while Nero likely didn't start the fire, he may have exploited it for his own ends. His grand rebuilding plans, particularly the Domus Aurea, lend credence to the idea that he saw opportunity in the disaster. The controversy surrounding Nero and the Great Fire teaches us valuable lessons about historical interpretation. It reminds us to approach historical accounts critically, to consider the motivations behind them, and to look for corroborating evidence. In our own era of fake news and information overload, these lessons are more relevant than ever. Moreover, the persistence of the Nero fiddle while Rome burned myth demonstrates of a compelling narrative. Despite its historical inaccuracy, the fiddle didn't even exist in ancient Rome. This image has endured for centuries, shaping our perception. As we grapple these conflicting narratives, we're reminded that history is not a simple recounting, but a complex interplay of perspective, biases. Long-term impact on Roman society and architecture. The Great Fire of 64 AD was more than just a momentary catastrophe. It was a pivotal event that reshaped Rome both physically and culturally. Its impact reverberated through Roman society for generations, leaving an indelible mark on the city's architecture, urban planning, and even its social fabric. In the realm of architecture and urban design, the changes were profound and lasting. The fire had exposed the vulnerabilities of Rome's ancient urban layout, with its narrow streets and densely packed wooden structures. The rebuilding efforts initiated by Nero set new standards that would influence city planning throughout the empire. The wider, straighter streets that replaced the old winding alleys became a hallmark of Roman urban design. These not only improved fire safety, but also enhanced commerce and movement within the city. The concept of the grid system, while not entirely new, gained prominence and would be replicated in many Roman colonies. The shift towards fire-resistant materials, particularly brick and stone, transformed the city's skyline. The wooden insulae that had dominated Rome's residential areas gave way to more stable, multi-story brick apartments. This change improved safety and allowed for higher population density, a model that would be adopted in other growing Roman cities. Nero's grand projects, particularly the Domus Aurea, while controversial, showcased new architectural techniques and aesthetics. The use of concrete domes, innovative at the time, would go on to influence iconic structures like the Pantheon. The luxurious decorations and spacious designs of Nero's palace set new standards for imperial residences, and would be emulated, albeit often on a smaller scale, by future emperors. Socially, the fire and its aftermath left deep scars. The displacement of thousands of residents altered the demographic makeup of neighborhoods. The persecution of Christians, while not ending with Nero, set a precedent for scapegoating minorities during times of crisis, a dark pattern that would repeat throughout history. The fire also had significant economic repercussions. The massive rebuilding effort stimulated certain sectors of the economy, but also strained Rome's resources. The influx of workers from across the empire to aid in reconstruction changed the city's labor dynamics and cultural makeup. Perhaps most intriguingly, the Great Fire and Nero's response to it shaped Roman historical consciousness. It became a touchstone event, often referenced by later writers and thinkers. The debates over Nero's culpability and the appropriateness of his rebuilding efforts sparked discussions about the nature of imperial power and responsibility that would continue long after his reign. In many ways, the Rome that emerged from the ashes of 64 AD was a new city, more organized, more monumental, and more reflective of imperial power. Yet it was also a city grappling with trauma, with changed social dynamics, and with questions about its own identity. The lessons learned from the Great Fire about urban planning, disaster response, and the fragility of even the mightiest cities would inform Roman thinking for centuries. Even today, as we design our own cities and prepare for potential disasters, we can look back to this pivotal moment in Roman history for insights and cautionary tales. The Great Fire of Rome, then, stands not just as a historical event, but as a turning point that shaped the physical and cultural landscape of one of the world's greatest civilizations. Its echoes can still be heard in the streets of modern Rome and in the principles of urban planning we use today. Nero's downfall and legacy. The Great Fire of Rome marked a turning point in Nero's reign, but it was far from the end. The years following the fire saw Nero's grip on power gradually weaken, culminating in a dramatic downfall that would cement his place in history as one of Rome's most notorious emperors. As Rome rebuilt, Nero's extravagance and perceived self-indulgence began to wear thin on both the populace and the elite. The Domus Aurea, while architecturally impressive, came to symbolize the emperor's excess in the eyes of many. Nero's artistic pursuits, once seen as eccentric but tolerable, now seemed frivolous in the face of Rome's recent tragedy. Political tensions escalated. Nero's relationships with the Senate deteriorated as he concentrated more power in his own hands. His foreign policy, particularly in regard to the Jewish revolt in Judea and conflicts with Parthia, was seen as mismanaged. Conspiracies began to form, and Nero's paranoia grew. He ordered the deaths of several prominent Romans, including his former tutor Seneca, further alienating the elite. The tipping point came in 68 AD when Gaius Julius Vindex, governor of Gallia Lugdunensis, rebelled against Nero's tax policies. Though Vindex was defeated, his actions sparked a chain of events that would lead to Nero's downfall. Other governors and military leaders began to turn against the emperor. As support crumbled around him, Nero found himself isolated. The Praetorian Guard, once his staunch protectors, abandoned him. The Senate declared him a public enemy. In June of 68 AD, facing imminent arrest and execution, Nero chose suicide, allegedly uttering the famous last words, "What an artist dies in me." Nero's death marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and plunged Rome into a period of civil war known as the Year of the Four Emperors. But while his reign had ended, Nero's impact on Rome and his place in historical memory were just beginning to take shape. In the immediate aftermath of his death, Nero's memory was thoroughly condemned. His statues were torn down. His name was erased from many public inscriptions, a practice known as damnatio memoriae. The Domus Aurea was stripped of its treasures and largely buried. Yet, strangely, a cult of Nero emerged among some of the lower classes. There were those who refused to believe he was dead, giving rise to the legend of Nero Redivivus, the idea that Nero would return to reclaim his throne. This myth persisted for decades, with several impostors claiming to be the resurrected emperor. As time passed, Nero's legacy became increasingly complex. He was remembered as a tyrant, yes, but also as a patron of the arts, an architectural visionary, and a populist leader who often sided with the common people against the elite. His reign became a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power, but also a reminder of the complex nature of leadership and historical memory. Today, Nero remains one of the most recognized and controversial figures of ancient Rome. His name has become synonymous with tyranny and excess, yet historians continue to debate the reality behind the myth. Was he truly the monster depicted by ancient writers, or a misunderstood ruler caught in the political machinations of his time? Nero's legacy serves as a powerful reminder of the complexities of history. It challenges us to look beyond simple narratives of good and evil, to consider the biases in our sources, and to recognize the often fine line between visionary leadership and destructive excess. As we reflect on Nero's reign, we're prompted to consider our own leaders and how they might be remembered by history. What lessons can we draw from Nero's fall from power? How do we balance judgment of a leader's actions with understanding of their circumstances? These questions, sparked by events nearly 2 millennia ago, remain remarkably relevant in our modern world. Legacy and lessons for today's world. The story of Nero and the Great Fire of Rome isn't just a tale from ancient history. It's a mirror reflecting our own world, our leaders, and ourselves. What can we learn from this epic saga that spanned nearly 2 millennia ago? First, consider how easily public perception can shift. Nero's fall from grace reminds us to question our assumptions about leaders and to seek truth beyond popular narratives. In our age of social media and instant news, how often do we rush to judgment without considering all the facts? The rebuilding of Rome offers lessons in crisis management and urban planning that resonate today. As we face our own global challenges, climate change, pandemics, urban overcrowding, how can we balance immediate needs with long-term vision? Are we brave enough to implement radical changes when necessary? Nero's persecution of Christians serves as a stark warning about the dangers of scapegoating. In times of crisis, it's all too easy to blame minority groups. How can we guard against this impulse in our own societies? How do we ensure that fear and anger don't lead us to compromise our values? The conflicting historical accounts of Nero's reign challenge us to think critically about the information we consume. In an era of fake news and information overload, how can we become better at distinguishing fact from fiction? How do we navigate the complex landscape of competing narratives? These questions aren't just academic. They're crucial to shaping our world. As you reflect on the story of Nero and the Great Fire, consider how you might apply these lessons in your own life and community. How can you become a more discerning consumer of information? How might you contribute to making your own city more resilient and equitable? Before we conclude, let's take a moment to zoom out and consider the broader canvas of Roman history. Imagine a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber, growing over centuries into the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. From the founding of Rome by Romulus and Remus, through the Age of Kings, the birth of the Republic, the Punic Wars, the rise of Julius Caesar, and the establishment of the empire, each era brought its own triumphs and tragedies. Nero's reign was but one chapter in this grand narrative, yet it encapsulates so many of the themes that defined Roman civilization: power, ambition, innovation, and the eternal struggle between tyranny and freedom. If you're intrigued by this glimpse into Roman history, I encourage you to check out our video on the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, which you'll see recommended on your screen now. It's a journey through centuries of conquest, culture, and crisis that will deepen your understanding of how Rome shaped our world. As we wrap up, I invite you to engage with this content beyond just passive viewing. How has this story changed your perspective? What questions has it raised for you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights might spark a fascinating discussion or even inspire our next video topic. If you found value in this exploration of history, consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these crucial historical lessons to light. And if you're in a position to do so, please consider making a donation. Your contribution, no matter how small, helps us create more content that bridges the gap between ancient wisdom and modern challenges. Remember, history isn't just about the past. It's a tool for understanding our present and shaping our future. The story of Nero and the Great Fire of Rome isn't just a dusty tale from antiquity. It's a call to action, challenging us to think critically, lead compassionately, and build resilient communities. How will you answer that call?